Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, wind-fueled wildfires whipping through New Mexico. Why the weather has been so extreme this year.
How is climate change affecting La Nina? Those are questions that we have to ask and get some answers for.
Plus, a professor and author explains how to cope with the burden of climate anxiety and the importance of finding community during crisis. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm producer Lou DeVizio, filling in for Gene Grant. This year's fire season is like nothing New Mexicans have ever experienced. As we're taping this, the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire in northern New Mexico has forced the evacuation of tens of thousands of New Mexicans. It's destroyed hundreds of homes, scarred the landscape, and it's marching onward every day. That's despite the best efforts of firefighters on the ground and tankers and pilots in the sky. It's already on track to surpass the largest fire in the state's history, the Whitewater Baldy Fire, which burned more than 297,000 acres in 2012. What we're seeing in our state right now, the dry and hot spring and the sustained high winds, it's remarkable in its intensity and its horror. In about 15 minutes, environment reporter Laura Paskus sits down with a National Weather Service meteorologist to find out why winds have been so extreme this year. Then, our Line Opinion panelists weigh in on the growing discussion surrounding prescribed burns. But we start with another story blazing through headlines across the country, the leaked Supreme Court draft opinion that could end federal abortion protections. But what would happen here in New Mexico? Let's get to the line.
Hello and welcome to our Line Opinion panelists this week. I'm Kevin McDonald, executive producer, filling in for Gene Grant, who's under the weather. Happy to be joined by Jessica Onsuras, news director at the Carlsbad Current-Argus. Great to see Catherine McGill back with us as always. She is founder and director at New Mexico Black Leadership Council, amongst about half a dozen other things. And welcome back to the line regular Tom Garrity from the Garrity Group PR. Thank you all for being here, and we are starting with one of the most controversial stories circulating right now. Of course, that's the leaked draft opinion that would overturn Roe versus Wade. The Supreme Court's official decision won't be made until June or July, and it still could move in a different direction, but the leak is sparking conversations about what would happen if that ruling were overturned. Abortion access would remain legal in New Mexico because of a 2021 law passed by the state legislature and signed by Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. Now some other states are scrambling to make a similar move, but it might not be in time. And Tom, just curious, could you have imagined when there was the debate over this bill in 2020 and then 2021, would it actually pass, that it would become so relevant, so prescient, so quickly?
Yeah, definitely, when Senator Kerry Hamblin out of Las Cruces, helped to introduce the legislation back in 2021, I think a lot of people were thinking, okay, it's just more of a political power play than anything else to shore up the bets. And of course, this was right off of the President Biden's victory over former President Trump. And so there was a lot, the anxiety on both sides and the division was so high that a lot of entities decided that government entities decided they wanted to try and hedge their bets just in case the Supreme Court did something. And lo and behold, the Supreme Court did.
Yeah, and Jessica, you down there in Carlsbad, any cities close to the border are going to be the tip of the spear on this, like a lot of places. There's already talk from Planned Parenthood of Rocky Mountains about adding clinics in border towns. We know if this all plays out as we think it's going to right now, that we will be basically surrounded, minus Colorado, with abortion bans. So there's going to be a lot of influx here, and COVID has laid bare a lot of our healthcare shortage issues. Is there a concern about the strain that you're feeling down there?
Actually, yes. So when we started reporting on what Texas was doing, its moves to ban abortion in that 6-week period, after that 6-week period, there was a lot of talk about seeing the population in need of abortion services move into New Mexico, which was considered, a state friendly to this type of service. But what we started to see really was a bigger question about access. We talk about New Mexico abolishing its 69 Act that would criminalize abortions, but we don't talk about the actual services we have in place now, which when you think about it, out of the 33 counties in New Mexico, only 3 offer that service, and two of them are in central New Mexico. So we started to dive in a lot when it came to access, and that's just one of the challenges for the state when it comes to abortion services. We're really talking about staffing shortages, about financial challenges, especially for those seeking this type of service. Kathy probably speak to this a whole lot more than I could, but we see disproportionately impacted people of color when it comes to access. So there are still a lot of questions about how New Mexico will weather its neighboring states banning abortion services, Oklahoma included, is my understanding, in the coming year or so.
And Kathy, if you would, yes, please expand on that a little bit more about how this issue is even more of a flashpoint in communities of color, poor communities, and what more you think might be coming our way in terms of legislation around this as we see that strain build up.
So a couple of things for me. I think what I had to come to when we woke up and heard the news about the leak of the majority opinion from the Supreme Court was that life as we know it is no more. And we could have never imagined that something like this would happen, and don't know who leaked the information, but what it has brought back to us is the fact that this is a move perhaps more to states' rights and to fear of federalism, and hoping that things will be adjudicated by the states, and all the trigger laws that are in effect just remind me of what we were dealing with in the 1950s and the 1960s about limiting people's rights and having the states be able to choose who could do what. So we know that people of color will be adversely affected. And when people just simply talk about the fact that you now would have to travel to get an abortion, so who has the means to do that? And so it brings into mind all of these morality issues, and, in order to laugh to keep from crying, the meme that was going around about a bunch of dogs, probably mostly male dogs, discussing feline healthcare.
And we, of course, know that there are people here in New Mexico, everywhere, that actually think this is a good thing, and this is all going to carry over into a midterm election. And I'm just curious what you guys think about what impact this issue will have in our midterms coming up. Does it help one party over the other in terms of turnout? Let's just start there. Tom, what do you think?
Well, the topic of abortion is something that really mobilizes the extremes of each of the parties. So progressives definitely a lot more, focused on this as an issue. Will get them out to the polls just in the same way as the religious right or the conservatives are going out for the Republican side. The unintended consequences that I think what we could see is that you will have extremist candidates potentially elected on either side because of the influence of this, potentially landmark case from the Supreme Court. So I think that the impact that we'll see is really more on the primaries, as you said, and we'll really have to see how that impacts the types of candidates that both the Republicans and the Democrats send out into the general primary or general election.
And Jessica, you're obviously down in a more conservative part of the state. What do you think what is this issue in terms of mobilizing to the vote in 2022?
So as you noted, we're in a conservative part of the state. We've got some very red voters in Southeast New Mexico specifically. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is these counties down here already starting to pass resolutions naming their communities pro-life or life-saving communities. And so I think that's a big flag to our Republican candidates out there, that they want to see them take a stance a stronger stance and use strong language when it comes to abortion itself. I do know that in the governor's race, right, our front runners, Ron Ketty and Rebecca Dow, have already come out with a statement about how they feel about this whole thing. But I think that voters in southern New Mexico, southeast New Mexico, are really looking for Republican candidates to take this topic back, for it to be a moment for them to really get that message out there in what has been a largely blue state.
And we'll come back to the governor's race in a second, but I just want to stick with you a moment on your congressional representative there, Yvette Herrell, who is kind of done what we're hearing a lot on the national stage in terms of the main messages I have seen are outrage over the leak and not so much about what the decision may be. And just curious, do you see her changing her tactics at all, considering I myself on the west side of Albuquerque will now be voting in that district, right?
Maybe not changing so much as dialing back. I do think that those new lines drawn with redistricting have probably caused her to pause and reconsider how forcefully she wants to approach the issue. But you are right. I think that those newly drawn lines are going to force her to perhaps take a softer stance on the issue if she wants to continue to seek that seat.
And Kathy, back to the governor's race here. As Tom mentioned, this can kind of push candidates to the extremes. How do you see these already a crowded field, one of which the candidates is really a one-issue candidate on this very issue of abortion, overturning Roe versus Wade. So what do you see the candidates, and if they go full bore in this mode, can they make their way back into the center at all in a general election?
I think it's going to be challenging. Obviously, people are, as you mentioned earlier, hedging their bets to try to get the pulse of the constituencies. But what we know is that most of the voting public agrees with having Roe v. Wade be the settled law of the land. So, politicians who may be opposite to that, it depends on what they feel their base is, and if it's strong enough to get them over the finish line in a primary situation, they just really have to try to figure out what's the pulse of the people that they are playing to. We know on the Democratic side, they're going to be full bore that we want to keep Roe versus Wade, but for Republican candidates, they're really going to have to hedge their bets.
And just about 15 seconds left, Tom, real quick, what's the bump for Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham in her reelection, being able to point to that law that she got passed last year and that overwhelming support in public opinion polls that Kathy just mentioned for the upholding of Roe versus Wade?
Yeah, clearly for the governor, this is a topic that will motivate her base to get out and vote. And that's probably the biggest bump. The question is, when we get closer to Election Day, how much of this will really still be top of mind for all the voters? Because we've seen so many times how issues can come up within a moment's notice and change the direction of a campaign.
Great. Thank you to all of our line panelists. We'll be back here again in our virtual roundtable in about 10 minutes to talk about the largest wildfire in the country burning right now here in New Mexico.
This next 10 years matters so much. We often hear makes people feel like, okay, I'll just work my tail off until the problem is solved, and then I'll be able to maybe relax. There's no time for rest.
In New Mexico, we know all about gusty spring winds, but this year has been particularly brutal, causing damage, fueling wildfires, and whipping up dust storms. To find out if these conditions are as unusual as they seem, environment reporter Laura Paskus sat down with Scott Overpeck. He's with the National Weather Service in Albuquerque, which has been extra busy lately, working across agencies to help spread the word about fire weather. That's weather with low humidity and intense winds.
Scott Overpeck, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Laura. I'm glad to be here.
So we all know spring in New Mexico is windy, but April and now into May, are these winds as unusual as they seem to me right now?
Well, one thing is for sure is that the winds have been noticeably higher. It's not unusual for April and May because those are our windiest times of the year, but we've issued several more high wind warnings and wind advisories, notifying people that, yes, we're going to have some high winds on those days. We've issued a lot more of those within April and May than we have for quite some time, probably going back to 2011. So it's certainly been a windy year so far.
So we'll get to kind of this past weekend's conditions, but I wanted to look back to April a little bit. April 22nd, April 29th, those felt like really notable days. Do those show up in the data too, or is it just me remembering what those days were like?
No, those showed up in the data as well. There were several areas that had wind gusts up to 60, 70 miles per hour, and that certainly was what was a big driver for a lot of the wildfires that we have and causing a lot of spread. So certainly not your imagination. Certainly those were some of our windier days in April, and we tried to get the warnings out for people and let them know that be prepared for the wind on those days, because those were certainly big days for those times.
Taking us back to last week, kind of the week before Mother's Day, the National Weather Service was all over these warnings. The governor was talking about them. Firefighters were certainly watching them. Can you describe what you knew was coming, what happened, and why?
Certainly, I think the biggest thing is that we knew that we could see that there was a big storm system, a trough that was developing up in the Big Basin, or Great Basin, and then down towards the Four Corners. We knew that this would put the jet stream pretty well over our neck of the woods, over New Mexico. And so that was one of those features that we could really kind of pinpoint several days in advance. And not only that, like I mentioned before, it was going to be kind of slow moving. And so we're still kind of under that jet stream even now. And that's why we decided to really kind of push the envelope and say, this is not your ordinary system. It's going to be a little bit slower moving. That means we're going to have several days where we could have strong and high winds. And that's kind of what bared out over the weekend, even yesterday. So that's kind of the reasoning why we could see this in the data, we could forecast, we could get the word out. And it was a really big help to have everybody working together, not just the National Weather Service, but like you said, the governor and other agencies just having that same message and letting people know that this is something that we need to really be prepared for, and especially in those wildfire areas.
So every day I kind of check the weather like everybody else and see it's going to be another windy day, and I keep thinking, well, maybe this will be the last one. Like, are we just looking at continued on and off windy conditions through the spring this year?
Well, I think it's going to be depending on how these storm systems move across the southern Rockies. So we're kind of in that period now. It does, in the forecast, it does look like winds will drop off some toward the weekend, but then even if we look way out, beyond 7, 8, 10 days out, it's about as far as our forecast models will go. It does look like next week we might see the winds come back a little bit stronger. So we're just going to have to take it as it comes, unfortunately.
So, we talk on our show a lot about climate change, and there are certainly certain things like rising temperatures and changes in snowpack that we can point toward climate change and warming. Are these wind patterns, does this have anything to do with warming and climate change, or is this something separate?
I think where climate change, like you mentioned, really has its impact is, we're looking at the drought conditions, we're looking at these drier, below normal precipitation conditions, and there's some tie with that to even the El Nino, La Nina pattern that we're in. We're currently in La Nina. And so how does climate change really affect those patterns? And then that's going to impact what our weather pattern looks like for each spring. So it's kind of trickles all the way down, but there is going to be some influence on where and how these storm systems develop based on that. Getting down to the nitty-gritty details, can we really nail that down? Not exactly, but you definitely know that there's those connections, and there are going to be some impacts in influencing what we get on a day-to-day weather based off that. It's just hard to really pinpoint exactly which days, okay, was this really within the realms of what we typically see? Is this out of the ordinary? This recent pattern certainly could be more tied to La Nina, but then how is climate change affecting La Nina? Those are questions that we have to ask and get some answers for.
So I already know this isn't a fair question to ask because we're talking about 5 and 10 day forecasts, but is this pattern that we're seeing this year, are we going to look back on this year and be like, whew, that was an outlier, that was a really rotten year? Or will we look back on this year and be like, that was the start of a change that we're going to start seeing on a regular basis in the spring?
I think we're kind of looking at this as, averaging out the extremes. This could potentially be one of those years that's going to stick out from more of the others. How frequently are they going to be? That's an unknown. We really just don't know. Is this going to be a start of a new trend? The atmosphere likes to balance things out. Climate likes to balance things out. And so certainly we're looking at a really dry year, and certainly see that bear out in the climate data. So we'll just have to see a little bit more, get a little bit more information on how this really falls out, and can we see if this is a new trend and moving forward.
Yeah. So lastly, I just want to, when people get those alerts, people see, what are some of the things that you all would like us to do when we see these alerts and warnings?
So I think the main thing is when you see a warning for like red flag conditions, that's basically saying, no, don't do anything with a flame. Don't do anything that causes a spark. I know that people want to get work done on their property, want to, take care of any shrubs around and those kinds of things. Any kind of outdoor welding, anything like that's just not really a good idea. If you're out camping, really use extra special care to make sure your campfires are contained and put out, and follow the regulations from the state parks and national parks, and follow what they suggest you do. Even trucks stopping on the side of the road, you wouldn't think of hot brakes being something that could do it, but I mean, it's that kind of thing that could really even simply just set off a brush fire. So it just doesn't take much in these conditions to get something going. And then lastly, if you're in one of these areas dealing with the wildfires in close proximity, really follow the evacuation orders, have a go kit, have something ready to go so that you can evacuate at that moment's notice.
Yeah, one of the things that I feel like I never fully understood until this fire season was that evacuation order has so much to do with your exit route. I think sometimes I in the past had thought it had to do with, the fire's coming this way, and I see it's over there, I don't need to think about it yet, but really those evacuation routes are just critically important. Yeah,
and I think that's kind of something that people really don't quite get, is that the fire may not be affecting their property right away, but their escape route could be very well cut off, and that's what's really important, is that you've got to have a way to get out.
Yeah, scary stuff this year. Thank you so much for coming on the show and for helping us understand what the heck's going on.
Well, I appreciate being on. Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome back to our opinion panelists. We're going to stick to that topic we just heard about, these crazy high winds and the wildfires they're fueling. The largest fire burning in the country right now is the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire. Hermit's Peak started as a prescribed burn before it grew out of control. And during a briefing on the wildfires this week, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham said New Mexicans don't have to worry about that happening again, and that the state forester, Homeland Security, other state and federal officials will all have a conversation about how and when these burns are performed. But of course, the damage is already done. The governor says she understands people's anger and that she's upset too, calling this situation negligent. Now she's looking for accountability and says it's likely Congress and other federal partners will accept that there is significant federal responsibility, adding, if anyone wants a fight over it, they'll get one. So let's start with you, Kathy. I know it's hard right now in the middle of fighting them, but this issue of accountability and how we get at that, what's your take on how we should get at that?
Oh, I love accountability. Because I'll use it in all things all the time. And I would say that everyone does need to accept accountability for this controlled burn and the fact that it got way out of hand. I know that, people have accepted some responsibility, but I do think that we may be getting the right answer to the wrong question. So I think maybe the accountability needs to be around discussing whether or not this is climate change, or it's a function of this controlled burn getting out of hand and there being some malfeasance involved. So I think we need to talk about climate change and the fact that perhaps this was no surprise and that it was a predictable, almost certain future that this was going to happen at some point, because we're talking about accountability for this particular issue, but there's a larger issue that needs to be discussed.
Yeah, and we've talked to very recently lots of folks who talk about how what worked in the past isn't going to now, because again, winds, the heat, the dryness, it was all earlier. None of us can really remember a time of that serious of a wildfire in April, right? And here we are in May. We haven't even really hit the traditional wildfire season, and it's unlike anything we've ever seen. So Tom, for you again too, is it good for the governor to sort of lay the groundwork to lead the charge down the road about finding out what we do to adjust and to address that accountability question?
Oh, absolutely. She's the best person to represent the state's interests to the federal government at this point. And, the overall state response through Department of Homeland Security has really been quite impressive as far as the outreach and coordination amongst all the different communities who, for the most part, there might just be a local fire department or a county fire department. And DHS has done a really good job. And I think that the governor can really take that coordinated state effort to basically, show Washington how they need to kind of come up and help New Mexico get through this time.
And part of that, last week, the governor, of course, announced her request for a federal emergency declaration. And unlike most of those federal requests, it was signed and approved by the president within 2 days. And now the state is set to receive federal emergency funds while the emergency is still ongoing. Jessica, how important is that for a state like ours where people are struggling? We know that we are taxing our water systems even more to fight the fires, and many water systems, people are being told they can't drink the water because of the ash and things that are getting into their systems. So that money is really crucial here, isn't it?
Yeah, fighting fires is expensive on all fronts. You're talking about the cost for personnel, you're talking about the cost for management, about the cost for water, and especially when you've got such a long period ongoing fire. It was exceptional to see that signed as quickly as it was, but I think that it hasn't escaped anyone, local, regional, state, federal level, how big of a disaster this actually is and how much of an impact it has actually had on New Mexico residents.
Yeah, now if we could just get the national media once again to realize that A, we are not Arizona, and B, we are in the United States, we'd really be doing something, right? A lot of examples of that of late. We did talk about the extraordinarily difficult conditions facing wildland firefighters. Laura Paskus with Our Land has done a lot on that, including their compensation, just $15 an hour in most cases. Well, the U.S. House passed a bipartisan bill to ensure federal firefighters receive the same job-related disability and retirement benefits as state, county, municipal firefighters. Tom, how important is that when you're talking about 1,400, 1,500 people here trying to fend off all these flames in all these locations?
Yeah, so if the question's about increasing the amount of funding that we pay firefighters, then I would say that yes, we definitely need to take a look at that. Of course, the economy right now, it's kind of interesting how, it's a $15 an hour job amidst this time of inflation. And so, I think that but of course, the work that firefighters and other public servants do in life-saving situations, really, those are services you can't really put a price tag on. But, really getting, firefighters and supporting them in different ways to really help save New Mexico communities. Hopefully there'll be a little extra incentive if that's possible for all of their effort.
Yeah, and circling back to my earlier point, obviously folks can do two things at once. But Kathy, do you think that a lot of these calls for accountability and the effort there might be better used to help boost up these firefighters who have seasonal work, and when it's not fire season, they're not eligible for health care benefits, the $15 an hour? This is something that is not just an issue in New Mexico, right? We see it throughout the Southwest, and how do we lead that charge in the midst of all this too?
I think that you're right, that we don't just work on one thing if we're going to approach this issue holistically. In some of the work that I've done with New Mexico counties, I became aware of the fact that many counties in our 33 don't have a professional fire service. They're working with volunteer firefighters, so they're not getting paid anything. And so it is definitely something that we need to address. And obviously $15 is minimum wage for a really dangerous, hazardous job that requires some expertise. And so it's something I think we can and should address, and that the public should demand it.
Let's move on to evacuations now, something a lot of people are struggling and dealing with. And during her briefing earlier this week, the governor stressed the importance of New Mexico's Ready, Set, Go policy for people near these fires, saying she fears too many New Mexicans aren't following the best practices. Is this a communication thing? She also made a point of mentioning that there haven't been any known cases of looting for people who may not want to leave their house because they're afraid things will get stolen. But this puts firefighters in danger. It can just exacerbate an already terrible situation. Is there anything more we could be doing to try to reinforce people getting out when experts say it's time to get out? Let's go to you, Jessica. Sorry.
Oh, sure. So I think you have to realize that we are talking about more than just a danger to yourself. People love their homes. They live there for a reason. They're emotionally connected to them. They're emotionally connected to their community. So it's always going to be difficult to convince them, no matter the danger to themselves, to just abandon that and hope for the best, which is basically what we're telling those now affected by the hermits in Cav Canyon fire is, you've got to get out and leave everything behind except the necessary items. What we saw in Ruidoso during the McBride fire was a lot of people choosing to stay and to do what they could to save their homes, regardless of how well it was communicated that Ready, Set, Go. When they were given the go, they just refused. And part of it was fear of looting. Some of it was they wanted to lend a hand. They wanted to be able to participate in saving their homes and saving their community. I think when it comes to the question of communication, we are dealing with fires that are burning in rural areas where it's always been difficult to get out any type of public service announcement. And we're seeing that in a lot more, especially in northern New Mexico. And for those who haven't been involved in coverage of a fire, who haven't been in a fire, I think it's difficult for them to realize how much you lose, how many services you actually lose during a fire. You're not getting water, as you mentioned. You are isolated, you're cut off. There's sometimes no electricity. Sometimes you don't even have a radio in the house. So we talk a lot about being ready, set, go now, when we should be talking about preparing communities in the line of fire, excuse the pun, way ahead of time.
Absolutely, and again, a quick reminder that as we've learned, a lot of the evacuation orders don't even so much have to do in that moment with the fire moving towards, but it's the escape routes out, the routes you need to get out. So really important to heed all of that. Thanks again to our panel. And in less than 10 minutes, we'll take up one final discussion, Virgin Galactic's recent announcement that commercial space flights won't happen as soon as they planned.
Exciting news for parents in New Mexico. The state is expanding child care benefits for tens of thousands of New Mexico families. The new copay waivers are being funded by federal pandemic relief money, which the state says won't run out for at least 2 years. I sat down with the Secretary of New Mexico's Early Childhood Education and Care Department to find out who's eligible and how they can start using those new benefits. New Mexico is increasing child care subsidies that are already the most generous and broadly available in the United States. Thanks for joining us, Secretary Gruginski. New Mexico instituted these policies, different policies last June that brought down child care costs for low and middle income families. These new waivers are going to help families lower those costs even more. Who's eligible for these waivers and how much could they save?
Thank you, Lou. And the families who are eligible for this waiver are families who are working or going to school and need help paying for childcare up to 400% of the federal poverty level. For a family of four, that's $111,000 annual in gross income. So what we've done is we have said the cost of childcare is out of reach for most families. And so we have waived parent co-payments now until next year. And again, under Governor Lujan Grisham, we hope to make universal access to universal early care and education available to all families in New Mexico who need it.
How would you go about doing that? You said that you hope to do that in the future. What would that look like?
You know, we're going to need to continue to make the investments in New Mexico families and into the childcare providers who support them. We know that in New Mexico right now, we have many communities where there is not enough available care for the families who need it, especially for infants and toddlers and even school-age children. So while we continue to support the families now who have access and are using childcare, we also announced last week that we are going to help build more supply of childcare across the state.
Great. How did you determine the income eligibility levels for the subsidies?
We looked at, last year we extended the eligibility up to 350%, and families could stay on that assistance until 400%. But the governor said, no, we need to do more for families now, and families at those levels still need help. I mean, childcare for an infant in a high quality center costs $1,500 a month. Most families can't afford that. So our ability to use our federal relief dollars and under Governor Lujan Grisham's leadership to say, this is a critical support that families need right now in New Mexico, so they can take those dollars and invest them in their family, build their own family wealth, maybe build towards buying a home, supporting their child in other ways. So we're very happy that we could make this announcement and make this change for families in New Mexico.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned, the federal COVID-19 relief money, that's where a lot of this funding is coming from. That runs through July. What happens after that?
The relief dollars that we're using actually are available to New Mexico until September 30th, 2024. We have right now just said, let's take this the next year at a time and see how many families need the assistance. And we hope that these dollars will extend as long as till September of 2024. But we will at least continue waiving parent co-payments until June of 2023.
Okay. Yeah, I have that here. Another expansion started May 1st, runs through June 2023. Waiving child co-pays for households at 4 times the poverty line. You mentioned that, and it had previously been 350. That caught my eye just 400 times, or 4 times, I should say, the poverty line. Is the poverty line too low? Does that make this difficult, or do you just calculate those regardless?
Yeah, I mean, I think we think that the poverty line is too low. And so, families making $111,000 of gross income, having to pay $22,000 a year for their infant to receive care, that is not sustainable. That is going to put them behind in being able to save for their housing, for other things that they can do to support their family's long-term growth and development. So we believe that this investment is critical. We want to sustain these kind of investments in New Mexico families. Governor Lujan Grisham really knows that when families struggle to find care or to pay for care, that puts stress on the family, that puts stress on the relationships. And we know that when there's stress in a family, in a home, that impacts the development and the overall well-being of the young children, but also of the family as a whole. So these are the kind of policies that put families and children at the center.
Understood. Now, how can people acquire these copay waivers? Do they have to seek them out themselves? Is there an outreach program or some sort of automatic mechanism in place?
great question, Luke. We have childcare assistance offices all over the state. They can also go to our website and click on Am I Eligible? And right there, families can fill out the application, provide documentation, and somebody will follow up with them to make sure that all the paperwork is in. You still do have to be working or in school, and how much care you get access to is driven by how much you need. So we're excited to be able to offer that. We're also going to be holding enrollment fairs around the state. May 14th and May 21st, we'll be releasing some of that information so families can come to those sites, get enrolled, have their eligibility determined, and start getting assistance, real money back in their pockets to support their families in other important ways.
Okay. Now, do you have an estimate on exactly how many families this expansion would cover, like a number?
We're estimating around 30,000 families across New Mexico could benefit. We're seeing, I just talked to the staff today, we had 500 applicants come into the Am I Eligible just this past week. So that's exciting. We know there's families right now enrolled in childcare that are struggling to make those payments and are considering whether I have to pull my child out of childcare or how am I going to juggle because I don't know that I have the resources. So we're hoping that they're going to learn about this and they're going to come in and get the assistance they need. And we're also excited that because we're the only state in the nation that has based our childcare rates on what it costs to deliver that care, that our childcare providers are going to have the revenues they need to focus on quality, to focus on their staff, and to paying their staff commensurate with the value that they're giving to the children and the families and into our communities across the state.
Now, we're seeing staffing issues in a wide range of fields in New Mexico. I mean, you name it, they're probably short-staffed. And last week's announcement also expanded grants to childcare centers, subsidy to childcare workers, pursuing professional training. Does the state need more of these workers too?
Absolutely. Early childhood educators are in high demand, and that's why we also released the student success application to our higher education institutions so that students enrolled in their early childhood teacher prep programs, their infant family studies programs can get access up to $2,000 per semester in FY22 and in the fall of 22 and the spring of 23 to support things like transportation, rent, other costs that early childhood educators have as they're trying to work full-time and also go to school. So we're excited, again, using federal relief dollars to enhance, help accelerate, hopefully, their completion of their AA or their bachelor degree in early childhood.
Great. Thanks so much. It sounds like great stuff. Thanks, Secretary Gruginski, for your time and your information.
Welcome back to our Line Opinion panel. One final time this week. Virgin Galactic is announcing a delay in its plans for commercial space flights. The company says supply chain and labor issues make 2023 a more feasible goal. And this project obviously has major implications in southern New Mexico, Jessica, although maybe not all the way down into your area in Carlsbad. But how much of a blow is this for that part of the state as one of the big economic drivers?
Right. So we look at it as a revenue generating operation. And so when you talk about it from that standpoint, we are talking about a blow. We invested in this idea of space tourism for not only this vision of the future, but also for the boost it would give to our economy. So when you see it struggling, you just know that there are going to be implications for us at a revenue level.
Is part of this, Tom, that Virgin seems to still be, in terms of that economic driver, the only thing that people talk about? They reported $93 million in losses in the last quarter. But I think that there's a lot else going on there that may be helping with that economic situation that we're not hearing about. Do you agree with that?
Most definitely. And by means of disclosure, my firm does a lot of work in the economic development arena, which includes parts of the spaceport in a peripheral. But when you look at the spaceport as a whole, it's much more than Virgin Galactic. Obviously, Virgin Galactic is the premier tenant as far as getting the most attention. But there are other missions out there. Spin Launch is a fascinating hypersonic centrifuge that shoots satellites into low orbit. There are a couple of other very interesting missions out there as well. But I think, really looking at it from a New Mexico perspective, it's, how does the spaceport fit into the larger, microcosm of the community of aerospace? And when you look at all of the aerospace influence in Albuquerque at Sandia National Labs, the influence that Los Alamos has as well, and a number of the private entities, it's really probably the most visible part. And we just want to be able to see those vertical launches like Cape Canaveral, but that's just not how the spaceport is set up. It's set up to be much more of a mission-driven operation as opposed to the giant spectacles. But they're doing well in spaceport, and a lot of different missions taking place out there.
And it was about a year ago that we had that first launch where Richard Branson himself went up, and really not much since, and in part because of revelations after the fact that there were some problems on that flight, and they had to work with government officials to sort of get things in order. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin, they've already conducted 4 successful passenger flights to space since last summer. So what are we to make of all this in terms of Virgin's viability, Kathy?
So I'm just going to say that, I hate sounding like, why are we doing that, or get off my lawn, kind of thing. But I didn't know anything about the hypersonic centrifuge, Tom, and I'm glad for the education around it. But it just seems a bit like waiting for Godot at the spaceport. Like, is this really ever going to happen? And learning more about the losses, and obviously Virgin Galactic is out there as the premier tenant. So maybe we need to know more about what these other tenants are going to do, and how we're going to get a return on the $220 million investment that we made as a state. But I think for a lot of lay people who are not working in that economic development space, they're looking at this like space tourism, $450,000 and $500,000 for someone who's very wealthy to go up into space. Doesn't mean a whole bunch to most people.
Yeah, it's a high price tag. We've talked about that a lot. And again, worth reminding folks, right, Jessica, that this was a project funded by taxpayer dollars. And so there is an expectation of some success here to repay that investment, right?
Yeah, so I think Kathy kind of hit the nail on the head there. For those who are not insiders or who aren't paying attention and who are just reading the headlines, they are looking at the setback or the delay in the commercial operations until 2023 as a shrug. For those of us who kind of have some insight into what's happening, it seems to indicate problems or trouble, especially when, as you said, Kevin, you look at what Blue Origin is doing. But I think Tom was very insightful when he pointed out there is more happening there than we tend to know about. Maybe the bigger question is, how do we do a better job of talking about this new industry with your everyday average New Mexican, and educating them about the future benefits, question mark there, but hopefully to this whole project.
Yeah, and again, despite the delays and that competition from Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic maintains that its Delta-class rockets will be the best and most sustainably designed tourism spacecraft. Do you think that's enough of a talking point to help make up the difference? I'm not exactly sure what a sustainable space vehicle is, or what that means, but what do you think, Kathy?
Oh, I don't know. Elmer J. Fudd keeps coming into my head. I own a mansion and a yacht. I don't know. I think that most people don't know. And so I'm hoping that we just get more education about what is happening. And if it's going to be the best, I need to see it, because right now it feels a little bit about theater, a light theater of the absurd.
Yeah. Tom, what about you? Can you pick up on that?
Not necessarily on the theater of the absurd, because there are a lot of different activities that are taking place out there. They're caught in a catch-22 because there are a number of different missions that are taking place out there. It's like talking about what Sandia National Labs does or Los Alamos. There's a lot of different missions that are out there that they just, behind the gates, they just can't talk about. But I agree, both Catherine and Jessica, great points, that it needs to go just beyond, well, trust us, there's stuff going on out there. And so they really have to find a place, I think, all these entities that have these secure operations, is find that middle ground where you can provide just enough interest or information to let people know that this just isn't a waste of taxpayer dollars, to get that information out without giving away all of the reasons why they might be doing missions there.
And that's a great reminder too, Jessica. I'll turn to you real quick on this as we close out, but the transparency issue has been something around Spaceport as well, because these lease agreements and things are not public for the most part. And there are proprietary secrets in there, and that's the argument that's made. But do you think there needs to be a stronger push to actually be able to see the dollars and cents that are coming in and going out at the Spaceport?
I'm always going to say yes to transparency, no matter what it is. So yes, the answer to that question is yes. I think when we, especially because people tend to associate the taxpayer investment that we made into this as the backbone of this industry in New Mexico, we want to see what is happening. They want to know that there will be some sort of growth, that return on investment that Kathy mentioned earlier. When it comes to transparency, we all realize that there are industry secrets that will need to be kept, but that does not mean that there aren't certain items that shouldn't be shared or brought to light. I think that it's fair to ask to see the tenant leases, to have at least a general understanding of the investment that is being put into this Spaceport America.
All right, thanks. That's all the time we got. Appreciate the line panelists as always, and be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics we covered this week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
With wildfires and winds and drought, New Mexicans have plenty to worry about. Climate anxiety is something many of us grapple with, worrying about the future. Environment reporter Laura Paskus tracked down author Sarah Jaquette Ray to talk about her book, explaining climate anxiety and how to cope with it.
Professor Ray, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So even people who aren't being evacuated for a fire or facing water shortages this year, we all have emotional responses to what's happening in the world right now. What is climate anxiety that you write about in your book?
Yeah, so there's people who are experiencing immediate climate or environmental traumas, like sea level rise or natural disaster, various kinds of immediate things. And arguably, many scientists would say something like COVID is an immediate climate disaster too, that we're all experiencing some more intimately than others. But that's one set of climate anxieties, forms of sort of immediate distress, immediate threat to livelihood and life. But another kind of climate anxiety that also sort of took me by surprise a little bit when I first discovered it is this sort of anticipatory anxiety about what could be happening in the future. And this comes from all of the forecasts coming from scientists like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC reports that come out every couple of years, and various different models coming out from scientists, and actually reportage of the sixth great extinction, as Elizabeth Kolbert calls it. So there's a sense of what's life going to be like in the next 15, 20, 50 years. That's going to be in my lifetime. Many young people in particular are thinking about this. Will the planet be inhabitable? Will we have food? Will the ecosystem services that the entire economic system we live on, be functioning? And the thought of those things all falling apart creates climate anxiety, the sense of, the life as we know it, the conditions for health and thriving and for eating and breathing and drinking fresh water and having our houses, not fall apart or not burn down. That kind of uncertainty, what Glenn Albrecht calls global dread, is really what climate anxiety is. The APA defines eco-anxiety as a chronic fear of environmental doom, but I would say climate anxiety is more specific around the ways that people are responding to news around what's happening with climate change particularly.
You write about how seeing ourselves as part of a collective and acting collectively versus trying to do things individually is so important. And it made me think of like Joanna Macy, and she talks about group action and group work. What are the benefits of this collective action, this group work, this relationship building?
That's a really great question. There's many facets to that. So some people say that at the root cause of our social crises are the same as the root cause of the climate change crisis, which is disconnection, lack of community. And many people, if you look at Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, and you look at the sort of crisis of civil society, the crisis of community that's been sort of almost engineered by the ways that we've designed, not just architecture and cities and our automobiles and highways, but also we've sort of create a culture of individualism in American society, that you're on your own and go off and set yourself free from all of the fetters of your family and others. And there's a real fetish of that in American culture. And there's a lot of benefits to that. And I'm not denying entirely that there's some value to that. But it has had the unfortunate effect of making us think that we are alone in our action for the planet. So that's one way that it disempowers us. It helps us not able to see, makes us not able to see the ways that our actions are in concert already with a huge community of people, what Paul Hawken calls the blessed unrest, or some groundswell. Rebecca Solnit beautifully writes about this. And also it makes us not able to take a break when we need to build our resources. Many people, young people in particular, feel like they need to sort of burn the midnight oil and not sleep in order to do the amount of work that's necessary, because the problem is so urgent, right? This urgency of the problem, this next 10 years matters so much, we often hear, makes people feel like, okay, I'll just work my tail off until the problem is solved, and then I'll be able to maybe relax. There's no time for rest. And individualism shows up also in activism too, in a way that undermines our ability to keep engaged in these issues for the long term of our lives. The problem is not going to be resolved in 10 years. It's going to be going on for the rest of our lives. And so seeing ourselves in the collective is partly a sort of critical thinking tool to keep us energized, right? Let's focus on the fact that we are amplified in all these ways. I do a network mapping exercise with my students sometimes, where I help them see all the things that support them and that they support, and ask them how can they enhance those supports. And also there's some really interesting neuroscience about this, that there's sort of the mirror neurons that happens, the things that happens hormonally and chemically when we're actually in space with other people and when we're doing things with other people. And I find it really fascinating that there's things that happen, like if you did an MRI, if you could take a picture of people's brains when they're with people versus when they're on Zoom, or when they're on Zoom versus when they're alone, just the sheer act of being with people, doing something collectively, enhances all of the good feels that we might need to have chemically in our body. So there's some really cool stuff that happens there. Even just the neuroscience of it is really important.
Well, thanks for saying yes to this interview. I really have appreciated this conversation. I really, really recommend your book to anybody who's thinking about these issues right now. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate talking to you.
You can go to our website to watch Laura's full interview with Professor Ray. It includes advice on how to prioritize your actions and cope with climate anxiety. Thanks again for joining us and staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.